So, me and Liz have recently been getting into lending, and we're new at this, but we have done several loans so far, and we'd like to continue to do this going forward as a major portion of our real estate journey. So, today we actually wanted to cover some of the top questions that new lenders have that we had that hopefully we can answer for you as you're going through your own lending journey.
So we'll start off with just a high level question of what kind of deals do we, i.e., you and myself, focus on?
Yeah, so there's so many different lending opportunities that you can come across in real estate, a lot of different varieties of things that you can do. So what we're focusing on right now is just staying narrow and in the same main thing is first position lending. And so what that means is first position is the number one thing that's recorded against a property in the first position, right? So then if there's a second position, that's the number two thing that's recorded against a property as far as debt goes. So this is the most secure position. It also is in this instance too, it doesn't pay as high as maybe the second or third position, but you have the most security because you are the one that will be paid first in the event of a foreclosure or when the property goes to sell, anything like that. So it is the number one safest position that we focus on.
When you say recorded, what does that mean?
Yeah. So when, let's say you go to buy your house, just to, the same property that you live in currently, when they go, when the transaction closes, it is recorded at the county office, and the lien, your mortgage that you got through the bank, is also recorded at the same time. So the sale is recorded and the lien is recorded and everything is like marked down, right? And then let's say 2 days later, you decide to go and get a home equity line of credit, and that ends up being in the second position because that's the next thing that is recorded at the county office there. And so then that would show up next. And so that would be an example of a second position loan. That's not something that you and I would lend on. And not just because we don't do second position loans, but because that's something that's done through a bank. But you can have a second position loan as a private money lender.
And can you give just like a real world example of what a first position loan looks like? So let's say, yes, we're going to lend on this first position and it's this first position loan. Just show us like with numbers what that actually means.
Yeah. So, as an example, let's say that you find a property, or someone, let's say someone, not you probably, because you're focused on lending, but someone finds a property that they'd like to purchase and rehab. Most of the time, the types of loans that we're doing in the first position are more focused on people who are fixing and flipping a property. So they're finding a property and they're getting it at a huge discount, right? This property is probably worth two, three, 400,000, but they're buying it for, like, let's give an example of 65,000, right? And so they're significantly under the after repair value, or ARV. They're also significantly under the as is value. They're getting a nice deal on this property. And so they're buying this property for a very low amount. And then they're going to put in rehab, right? They're going to fix up the countertops. They're going to redo the kitchen. They're going to put in an extra bathroom. They're going to redo the paint and add carpet, all kinds of cool stuff to make it look beautiful again. And then they're going to sell that property for the two, three, 400,000 that I mentioned before. And then they're going to take the profit that they make, and then they're going to pay that first position loan off on the sale.
Example of ARV. So after repair value, what that is, how you kind of calculate it, and what are you doing with that information when you're looking at vetting a deal to lend on?
Yeah, so as far as looking at a deal to lend on, I'm more focused on the as is value of the property. And I'll give you an example of why that's important. Let's say that you find that awesome deal of a property that you buy for 65,000, but this property is worth 400,000 after it's renovated and repaired. So I loan you, let's say 50,000 on that property, or even the 65,000, because let's say it's even worth more than that right now. Say it's worth 100,000 right now, right? So I loan you 65,000 on that property to go ahead and get started. But then you turn around and fall off the face of the planet for whatever reason, right? Let's say you get abducted by aliens at this point. I then not being a fix and flipper, need to figure out what to do with this property. And if I based my calculations off of the after repair value of the property, then I would have to fully fix and flip this property in order for me to get my money back. So I don't want to do that. I'd actually prefer to base it off of the as is value of the property. So once again, if the property is worth 100,000 and you're buying it for 65,000, I can loan you that 65,000. So it's a safe amount to loan under, right? It's under a 75% as is value. So I can then therefore loan you that money. You fall off the face of the planet because you got abducted by aliens. So then I have to foreclose on the property because no one's making the payments. You're out in outer space somewhere. So I then take over that property and then I sell it to the next person who's going to fix and flip it. And I still have protected my capital. My 65,000 is still safe because that property is worth 100,000. So I can sell it to somebody else, maybe even for more than that, and recoup extra interest that I wouldn't have even got before. And that's the benefit of being in that first position, is you have the most control because you're the first position. You get to decide what to do with that property, and you make sure that anyone in the first position is paid before anyone else, right? So if there's that HELOC that I mentioned, if there's another private money lender that's then in third position or something else like that, you can have as many positions, like you can have 16 positions, right? And so in being in that first position puts you in the most protected space in case something crazy and unexpected happens. We just want to be prepared for it.
Sounds like you're focusing on first position loans, but in theory, just so I can better understand, if one were to focus on second or third position, what if there's no money left after the first position gets paid? What do the second and third position do?
Yeah, so the second and third position have the opportunity to take over the property if there's an opportunity, and then maybe they could fix and flip the property themselves, therefore, hopefully securing their position. But realistically, what's most likely going to happen is that they will lose their money.
So, who is typically involved in a deal throughout the steps of lending?
Yeah. So you have your borrower, and that's the person who is, using the money that you're lending, right? And so this person, you want to make sure you vetted them. But if you're in the first position, they themselves are a little bit less important than if you were lending in the second, third, et cetera position, right? Because you're really focused primarily on the property when you're in first position. But the borrower is still important, so they still play a huge role. You may also have a realtor that could potentially be involved in the transaction. A lot of these scenarios, if the realtor is involved, it's not necessarily like what you would consider a traditional sale. It's more of this person is like a referral or something like that, just because these tend to be really deeply discounted properties. And usually, when a realtor is involved, they're getting top dollar, and it's a beautiful property that's being sold, but not always. So you may have a realtor involved. You will certainly have a title company involved. So we like to send all of our money to the title company, or escrow, or an attorney, just depending on the state. So some states use title escrow and some states use attorney. Either way, one or the other will definitely be included, and you will do all of your funds that will be wired as the lender will go through title. So let's say there's a borrower, he's going to fix and flip the property. There's not going to ever be a scenario where you're going to, using that same example from before, that $100,000 as is value, you're loaning them the 65,000. You never are going to wire your money as a lender directly from your bank account to their bank account. It instead goes through escrow, so it can be tracked. So it's going to hit the attorney, it's going to hit the title company, it's going to go through that process so that everybody knows who's involved and they can make sure that the paper trail looks legit. So like I mentioned, we have the borrower, we have the lender, of course, is you. We have potentially a realtor, we have the title, we have the attorney. We also maybe have a wholesaler, and a wholesaler is the person who is getting the property under contract and then turning around and selling that contract. So they're not a real estate agent, but a concept is somewhat similar, but in this instance, they're selling the contract or the rights to purchase the property that they own at that point in time because they have it under contract themselves. So there may be a wholesaler and there will certainly be a seller. And the seller is obviously the person who currently owns the property or represents the interests of the person who owns the property. So it could be something that's in, going through probate or, foreclosure or something like that. There may be other parties representing the actual seller themselves, but the seller certainly will be involved too.
What is escrow and why is the money that I'm lending going into the escrow account?
Yeah, so if I wired you money right now, there would be really no paper trail besides just my bank account showing that I wired money. But when it goes through escrow, they're making sure that the proper steps are being taken. Because if I wire the money directly to that person who's buying the property for the 65,000, and I wire them 65,000, there's nothing out there that's keeping them from also turning around and soliciting the next person for 65,000 and the person after that for 65,000 and the person over here for 65,000. And then everybody says, "Oh, 65,000. Yeah, we're a-okay." But you have four people who've loaned 65,000 on a property and you don't know if any of those are going to be recorded, and if they are, in what order they're going to be recorded, like we talked about earlier. So it's really important to make sure that it goes through escrow because they're the ones who are going to be doing that recording. They're going to be making sure that you're set up in that first position like you think they are. You're going to know if there's any other funds that are involved, where they are, how many other liens they're going to have on the property, anything else like that. They're doing the title commitment and making sure that this property can even be purchased. Right? Is it clouded title? Is there anything weird going on in the background? Is there judgments on the property that can't be erased? Is there a tax lien that needs to be taken care of? Any of those weird things that can happen with properties, they're making sure that that's getting eliminated at that time.
Be clear, so escrow is kind of an account that is held at a title company, correct?
That's correct.
So a third party that technically doesn't have interest of the borrower or the lender, correct, where they're holding the money.
That's correct.
Now, what exactly is real estate lending?
Yeah, and so it's probably something that you might not have heard about before, but real estate lending is really just lending funds that are secured by real estate. And secured by real estate really means the lien, the position we talked about before, being recorded, and having that security of actually having that as the leverage, right? That is the thing that you have your security against. So having, rather than just loaning out 65,000 to a person and they write you an IOU back, it actually has and is attached to that house. So, right, if that person goes away, if that person dies, if that person gets very ill, right, if they have a life event, you still have that property that you're secured against because of the proper paperwork that happens at title, escrow, the attorney's office, rather than, like I said, some sort of IOU.
So why not a short-term rental like Airbnb or long-term rentals for real estate? Why lending?
Yeah, so not that those are bad strategies, and in fact, they're really good strategies for people, but lending is a great alternative if you're looking more for passive income. So, all of those strategies you just mentioned, short term, long term, co living, anything else that's hot topic right now, all of those things require a significant amount of management. And even if it isn't done by you directly, you're still having to manage the manager, right? So you're the one who's having to, if some big event happens, you're having to authorize your credit card to pay for things. You're having to deal and coordinate with things, contractors. You have to hire the property managers, then they have to run things by you. It's still not hands off, regardless of having property management or anything like that. Additionally, for people who have corporate jobs, W 2 jobs, professional workers, the odds of you having a significant amount of time to spend in order to want to do those things is pretty low, right? You probably have a significant time commitment from your day job. The odds of you wanting to add in, dealing with the toilets after a long day at the hospital or a long day at the office are just very low. And so lending is a great way to be a lot more passive, but still involved in real estate. And the returns can even be better than owning the properties themselves.
People even need money for real estate loans.
Yeah, so the best people to loan money to are actually people that don't need the money. They could get money from other means, but they're probably scaling and doing things at such a rate where the bank is a lot slower than actually going through a private money lender. And so that's really the benefit. The bank may give you a loan, let's say for 10%. These are fix and flip loans. These aren't like the ones that you're getting in a traditional sense for, Billy and Sally that are buying their, first home. This is a fix and flip, more extensive loan. 10% is probably pretty good. You're probably realistically looking at more at like 12%, and there may be some points involved, which is just an upfront fee that's usually calculated as a percentage of the total loan. So you're really looking at like pretty high interest rates and a decently fast relative to traditional home ownership or home purchase turnaround, but it's not going to be nearly as fast as a private money lender. Realistically, a private money lender could be solicited for a loan today and loan that money out probably in around 2 days, realistically, with the due diligence checks if they were able to get on it very quickly, but certainly within a week.
So what is a hard money lender? Is this the same thing as lending for first position?
So hard money lenders are in first position and they sound very, very similar, but hard money lenders are more of institutional lenders. So people that are more involved in like a hedge fund or some big bucket of money outside of something that probably you and I are connected to. Those are more of the hard money loans. They have pretty strict guidelines. They once again would do something like a 12% interest rate with 2 points. And it usually takes them, a week and a half to get the property closed, which is significantly faster than a traditional home purchase for a regular, house that might be your first time home buyer or something like that. Still much faster, but they still have guidelines that they have to follow because they're a fund, a hedge fund, something like that. So they have, requirements, and there's not a lot of wiggle room on those sometimes, which may be the reason why a private money lender might be used instead.
How are we even finding these individuals that need money for these real estate deals, such as for fix and flips?
Yeah, so a lot of networking is required for this if you want to find people that are doing this. And you and I specifically are in a couple of communities that we have paid for to be members of. So the Sub 2 community with Pace Morby, these are people that are mainly focused on creative real estate, but they also there's plenty of people that in there that do fix and flips and other types of real estate deals. And so we find them through there. I know you're also a part of the Gator community. That's another place to find people who need loans for fixing and flipping. Your local real estate investment association, or RIA, is another good place to find people who need these types of loans fix, and just you can find like the fix and flippers there. You can network on Facebook, you can network at meetups, but it's a lot of networking. The other alternative, though, if you don't have time for all of that networking and going to events and meetups and joining communities, or you don't want to spend the time on that, is to work with people who have loaned money to these fix and flippers in the past and have had success. And you can do what's called co-lending with them. So you kind of lend alongside of these people that have done this before. And for you and I know that's our goal going forward, is to co-lend with people after we've done it with our own money, all on our own without anybody else, and then help other people and by doing co-lending with them so that they can get into real estate lending going forward, and they can do it safely after we've put our own money on the line.
What does joint venture or JV mean, and is it the same as co-lending?
So, joint venture is when you work together on a project or, deal, something like that. And so, I would say co-lending is a type of joint venturing, but joint venturing isn't a type of co-lending. So it's like a circle, a square isn't a rectangle, or rectangle, you know what I mean, the analogy, right? So they one doesn't fit in the other, but the other one fits. So it's a type of working together with a partner on a project with shared goals where there's predefined responsibilities and outcomes and profit splits. But co-lending fits in as a JV, but there are other ways to JV. Like you could, for example, JV on selling a property because you have someone who's looking to buy it, you have that relationship, someone else is looking to sell their property, so you do a joint venture so that you make sure that you get paid, right? That's completely unrelated to lending, but it's a way to kind of work together, and it helps outline the terms of the deal.
So broadly speaking, how do you evaluate a real estate deal to decide if you would like to ultimately lend your money on it?
Yeah, so pretty broadly, we are looking at first the borrower. And like I said, in the first position, it's not nearly as important that this person is perfect as it would be if it was second or third position lending. But we still want to take a look at them, right? Do they have a good track record? Do they have any, lawsuits against them? Have they been charged for fraud? Anything crazy, right, about that? You just want to be aware of what's going on. If you're lending in second, third position, you're also going to look at credit score and other things that you want to make sure that there's other security, right? Do they have other real estate properties that they own and those sorts of things that you can make sure to be secured against them. But in the first position, we look at the borrower, but we don't spend as much time as we would otherwise. Then we take a look at the deal, and that is probably where the most time will be spent, is looking at the deal, making sure that this deal has enough meat on the bone. And what I mean by that is we are loaning below as is value. So not below after repair value, right? We don't care what it's going to look like later. The person who is doing the fix and flip could drop off the face of the planet. They could be abducted by aliens. We want to make sure that this property still has value, even if that happens. The worst thing possible happens, right? We want to make sure it still has value. So we're loaning at a percentage of the as is value of the property. So there's no floors in there right now. It's missing a toilet. That's what we're talking about, percentage of the as is value, not after you put in the floors and after the toilets in there, right? It's just what the property looks like right now as is.
There's a house on the market that had significant fire damage that normal individuals wouldn't buy, but let's say a fix and flipper wants to purchase it, and the as is value is, let's say, $100,000. Can you just give me an example of what you would loan potentially, since the as is value is 100K?
Yeah, so the as is value being 100K in a fire damaged property probably has more to do with the land. So you would need to make sure we're taking a look at how much it's going to cost to remove the property or bulldoze the property, and then completely do a rebuild. Now, it depends on the extent of the fire damage. Not all fire damages are created equal, right? Some have basically burnt to an absolute crisp, and some have just, been only in the kitchen. The rest of the house is completely salvageable. So it's something to kind of take note of. But in a scenario where the property is, let's say, as is worth 100,000, like you mentioned, we would be loaning somewhere between 50 and probably 70,000 for that property, even though it is worth 100,000. So we're wanting to do a percentage of the as is value of that property.
What does securing my property mean when I'm lending on a deal?
Securing your money.
Excuse me, let's start over. What does securing your money mean when you're lending on a real estate deal?
Yeah. So as an example, if I loaned you money right now and you created an IOU and like just put that in your safe, that isn't really secured against anything, right? There's nothing that says, well, if you don't give me that money I just loaned you back, then I can take your car or I can take your ring or I can take your house, right? Like, however, when you have secured your money against something, that means you've gone through the proper channels, you've gotten a promissory note, deed of trust, gone through escrow, there's a paper trail, it's been recorded at the county's office, and that is secured against the property. So then, if you don't pay me back, I can actually go and take that property through the proper channels to make sure that I don't lose my investment.
Level, what is a promissory note?
So it is just essentially a promise to pay, with the terms outlined in the document. It's pretty simple. It's not like super extensive, but it has what the kind of terms are in the agreement. And then that is part of what is your security for the property and for your money.
So, what documents or papers are needed that will secure the deal?
Yeah, so you want to make sure you have once again, gone through title, escrow, or an attorney, just making sure that there's an independent third party that's preparing this paperwork, because even the paperwork that could exist might not be the right paperwork. So you still want to make sure, or there could be terms that are wrong or all kinds of things. So you want to take a look at that paperwork and make sure that everything is going through the proper channels. And you also might want to get a transaction coordinator to make sure that you help. Have second like pairs of eyes to take a look at the documents as well. But you'll be looking for a promissory note, a deed of trust. You'll want a lender's policy, and that is something that is done through escrow. A personal guarantee from the people that are doing the borrowing. And then you will also want to be on the insurance as a loss payee in case something happens to the property.
So what happens if I don't receive all of those documents that you just mentioned?
So sometimes people make mistakes, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad, because not everyone goes into something with malintent. So I wouldn't be 100% alarmed if that has happened to you. However, it is as important as you can to quickly rectify that situation, and work with the person who you have loaned money to make sure that you are getting those. So, for example, let's say you loaned $65,000 on a property that was worth $100,000, but you didn't get a promissory note or deed of trust or lender's policy or anything. You basically got an IOU, and you're realizing this right now listening to us. So I think the next step would be to talk with the person who has borrowed the money and just make sure that the channels are open and see if they would be amenable to getting that done right away. And if they're on the up and up, I'm sure and certain that they would be. And so we would work together to start doing that. However, if they are not very amenable to working with you on that, that should start to give you some red flags. And I would work to see how you can start trying to get your money back as quickly as possible. And you unfortunately may not have very many options, but the best thing to do would be to potentially engage a transaction coordinator who can help make sure to prepare those documents going forward and help you coordinate with title or the attorney, escrow, etc., to make sure that this is in the right direction.
Deployed in a real estate deal when you're lending.
Yeah, so your money can be deployed for a long time. It really depends on the terms of the loan. However, the loans that you and I are primarily focusing on are around the 6-month time frame, because you have to think the person who's doing the fix and flipping is acquiring the property. They're getting the contractors in order, they're buying the materials, they're fixing up the property, they're getting it all done, and then they're listing the property for sale. And that's going to take a little bit of time for them to sell the property at that point in time. So even if the rehab and all of that stuff takes about 2 months, you still need to have a couple of months for them to sell the property. And here recently, properties have been staying on the market a little bit longer, so 6 months might stretch out into 9 months, or maybe even a little bit longer. But that's why it's really important to make sure that your numbers are very secure, and we're loaning on the as is value of the property, because the after repair value of the property, or the price that they're probably listing the property at, may change the longer things go on, right? Like throughout, if things keep waiting, right? If interest rates don't change, if the prices kind of keep getting a little bit more and more depressed, their after repair value estimate that was a year ago may not be true for it right now. So it's really important to still loan on the as is value of the property and anticipate that loans will go around 6 months.
How much money do you typically need to participate in lending your money for a real estate deal?
Yeah, so if you're thinking about first position, this is that first secured position. So in Utah, properties are, the average median price of a home is like right around 500,000. So that's a pretty expensive amount of money, like a high amount of money. And that's one of the main reasons I didn't think that I could get into lending for a really long time, because I didn't want to be as secure or less secure on the property and do the second position lending because, I didn't have $500,000 to lend, right? However, in the Midwest and the Southeast, properties are significantly cheaper, and that $65,000 of lending is a realistic amount to expect. So the lowest amount that you and I have done so far from a lending perspective was just under $12,000, and that was in first position on a land lending deal. So that just raw land, it doesn't have any house on it, anything like that. And that is the lowest amount. That can go up infinitely, but I would say on average, we would anticipate somewhere around 75,000 to 100,000 would be around the amount that we would expect. However, you don't need to have all of that 75,000 to 100,000 yourself. And in fact, you and I have worked together on deals already where we have pooled our money. And so you've done, like, let's say 50,000. It wasn't exactly that. And then I've done 50,000. We put that together for a $100,000 loan, right? And so keeping in mind that it doesn't have to entirely be all of just your money for that first position loan.
It sounds like you can link up with someone that you may know, just like we do in our case, or you can even link up with another investor that's also interested in deploying their money to reach the total amount that's needed, correct?
That's correct.
What are the usual types of returns that are expected and while lending your money?
Yeah, so the riskier the loan, hopefully the higher the payout. So there's people in the sub 2 community and in real estate who are expecting loan return rates 40, 50, 100% returns. However, the problem with those is they're significantly riskier. So while they can work out, they also might not work out. And when they don't work out, they usually don't work out really, really poorly. So, in an instance where you might lose all of your money, not just that you wouldn't get that return, that you may have all of your money go away entirely. So, it's really important to focus on both the amount that you can earn and the security simultaneously. So, in a first position lending opportunity, the things that we've been seeing are things from around 10% to around 15 to 20%. And I would say it's more common right around in the 10 to 12% range, but every once in a while, for example, that land lending deal, that was a 15% return annualized. And that's something that is a little bit higher just because it's such a small amount. And so, in order to actually make it worthwhile, the return is bumped up just a little bit. But keeping in mind that normally they're around 10 to 12% annualized.
So I've heard that I need to be careful about something called usury laws whenever lending. Can you explain to me what that means?
Yeah, so usury laws are the laws that are put in place to keep people from charging an astronomical amount of interest and really harming the person who is borrowing the money. And that's one of the key things to think about when people may be promising returns of 40, 50, 100% return in 30 days or something like that. The odds are that that isn't something that's even legal. So when I said that when they go wrong, they go really wrong and you can lose all your money, that could be a scenario where that would be likely to happen because let's say this person who borrows your money is unable to pay you back. Instead of working really hard and trying to come up with the money from other means or other deals or other investments that they have, instead they may just file a lawsuit and say that you were soliciting for such a high percentage, and you have it in writing, right? You have the promissory note, you have the deed of trust, you have it all written out that you are charging them a significantly higher percentage of money than is allowed legally. And there's many states with very low usury amounts, and you have to make sure that you stay under that amount in order to make sure that your lending deal is safe.
So to understand, it sounds like each state has a different percentage that is allowed. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Some states are higher than others, but you'll be safe around the 10 to 12% range across the board, which is great.
So what happens if the borrower goes over the time that they anticipated for the loan? So let's say they borrowed it for 6 months and now we are past the 6 month mark.
So, as part of the terms, you should have some late fee arrangements because let's be honest, things happen, right? There's always something that can go wrong in real estate. And that doesn't mean that this person who's borrowing the money is a bad person or they're trying to do something shady. It could just mean that they had an unexpected delay. Let's say there was a permit issue, right? That was caused by the county. They thought they would be able to add on this addition. And when they got down to it, they needed a permit. The permitting was slow. Or something like COVID happens unexpectedly and people can't, start work on the house for an extra couple of months than they thought so. Or the person who is borrowing the money gets really sick, or they list the property for sale and then the buyer's financing falls through twice, which is no fault of the sellers, right? So there's all different things that can cause the deal to go a little bit longer than is anticipated. So what I would recommend is, first off, if you're loaning money for 6 months and you know that you need that money in 6 months and one day to do something else with, let's say you have, a child getting married, or college tuition is due, or some big home purchase, or, something like that, then that would not be money that I would recommend loaning out, right? You need to make sure that this is money that you're not going to need right away after the term is up. And then what you would do in this instance where, we're starting to hit 6 months and one day is start taking a look at the contract and making sure you understand what the late fees and payments are that you are owed. And those should be included in the contract from the get-go. This isn't something where you say, okay, it's 5.5 months, I haven't heard anything, now's the time to talk about late fees. Absolutely not. You want to talk about late fees right at the beginning. What is the setup? What do you get paid if things go late? How is that going to be handled? And in theory, and hopefully, the property and the person who has been borrowing the money has been in communication the whole time, and they're letting you know, hey, we actually had our second contract fall through and we're going to solicit again. We're going to have to drop the price 5,000. You're still good, but I'm just letting you know that it's probably going to go a little bit later. I mean, things happen, right? That sounds like not a problem to me. They're being open, they're being communicative. The problem is when people don't communicate, and that's when you should start raising the alarm bells and start looking into the foreclosure process, which you should be able to do as you're in the first position.
Exactly what it mean for me to foreclose if I'm loaning in first position?
Yeah, so it basically means you're going to take control of the property. And so there are different processes for different states. But what it essentially means is that the borrower is going to lose rights to the property. And you can think about this not even in the lending space, but in somebody who owns their home and they don't make the payments on it anymore. So then the bank chooses to foreclose on them, and you see it go to auction, and you're able to bid at the auction for the property, just like you would if somebody stopped paying on their own house, and able to take the property back or feel confident that's going to get sold for more than what you are owed at that auction, and then you are able to take the proceeds.
When I'm lending my money on a real estate deal, let's say it's 6 months or a year that it's anticipated, when do I get paid? Do I get paid each month? Do I get paid at the end? How does that work?
Yeah, so it definitely depends on the terms of the deal, and some deals pay out monthly and some deals pay out at the end, and it really just depends on what your personal goals are. So you and I have worked with multiple operators that do things differently. And so if certain people are looking for monthly payments, then we would make sure to co-lend on a deal where there will be monthly payments. However, some people only pay at the end, because the management is easier, but they have open communication throughout, so you know that they are doing good things with your money. So you will get paid at the end, and it will be just the percentage at the very end.
So if I'm lending an individual money for a real estate deal, how are they getting the money to pay me back?
Yeah, so there are a couple different ways to get the money to pay you back, but the number one way in these fix and flips instances is that they are selling the property. So they bought the property for 65,000. It was as is value of 100,000. It had an after repair value of, let's say, 400,000, and they put 100,000 of their own money into fixing it and flipping it themselves, right? They put a new roof on, they updated the HVAC, they redid the plumbing, redid the flooring, painted the walls, redid the kitchen, all those things they put in 100,000. So now they have the 100,000 that they put in, they have the 65 that you put in, so 165,000, and they're selling the property for 400,000. So then they have a really sizable profit right there, right? Now, of course, they have to pay title, they have to pay the real estate agent. So it's not that, it doesn't mean that they get the 400 minus 165 and that's their profit, but you can still tell there's a nice chunk of change in there that they'll make their own profit, so that they'll have money then to take to the next deal on their own for the rehab, and then they'll also have the money to pay you out your interest.
So then what happens if the house doesn't sell?
So there's a couple of options if the house doesn't sell. So first thing is that they could do a refinance, and this is part of the BRRRR strategy. So it's buy, rehab, renovate, refinance, repeat, rent, refinance, repeat. Yes. Okay, so buy, rehab, rent, refinance, repeat. So basically, the process is that they're getting a renter in there so that that renter is justifying a new mortgage. So taking away that big 12% or whatever that they were, paying you. And now they're getting into a more traditional monthly payment, right? So that's more of like the 7% interest that we're seeing these days. Maybe they can get down to 6%, something like that. But that new mortgage will pay your loan off entirely, and that's when you get your money back and the additional interest if it was pay at the end, or the last month of interest if it was a monthly payment sort of situation. But that's how you get paid back if the property doesn't sell. The other way is if, let's say that they can't refinance you outright, the as is value was 100,000. They put in 60. As this value is 100,000, you loan them 65,000. They put in 100,000. They thought that it was going to go for 400,000. And every week they're dropping the price another 5,000. And now all of a sudden they're somehow at 165,000. So clearly all the money doesn't come out. So they may have to pay you back from another deal or their own personal funds at that point in time. But because you loaned at the as is value and not the after repair value, your money is still very secure.
So it sounds like it makes sense to not loan the full amount that someone asks for most of the time. Is that correct?
Most of the time, that is correct. You could potentially be a little bit more liberal with the amount as you've worked with this person over and over and over and over again. They have a track record of payback, but you still wouldn't be loaning 100% of the as is value, even with that track record. You could maybe say instead of doing 65,000, you could do 70,000, you could do 75,000, but you wouldn't be going to 95,000 as an example.
What are some of the risks involved with real estate lending?
So the risks involved in real estate lending are, one of the things, like I mentioned, the high risk and high reward sort of scenarios, especially for second position, third position, things like that. They're a lot riskier because your money is not as secure. There may, in those in an example where the as is value is 100,000, the first position loaned 65,000. Let's say the second position loaned 100,000, and they thought the after repair value was somewhere around 200,000. Well, if you see 65,000 plus 100,000, you're getting really close to that after repair value. And let's say that estimate was off by 10,000, and then they need to sell the properties. They need the realtors to be involved and get paid their commission. The title, escrow, or attorney fees happen, and that takes another chunk of change from closing costs. And then there's some holding time. All of a sudden, that profit is going away. So that the risks are that you could potentially lose your money. Or not necessarily even all of it, but a portion of it, or that you're not paid out the returns that you're anticipating. But that's why we mitigate by vetting borrowers as well as vetting the deal before making the decision to lend.
What are some of the pros of real estate lending?
So I think my favorite pro of real estate lending is not having to do the actual fixing and flipping or owning of the property outright, but still being able to cash in on those monthly payments and collecting the interest at the end. And it's secured by real estate. So contrary to stocks, which are secured against the value of a company, those can go up and down much more rapidly with things like tariffs, the Fed making decisions on interest rates, a jobs report, earnings from a particular company. Those things are really outside of your control. You can vet a company only so much, right? Their leadership could die in a plane crash. I mean, there's just things that are completely outside of your control, and that value of that stock can drop absolutely drastically. And when you lose money, right? Let's say you have your portfolio is at 100,000 and it takes a 20% hit, your portfolio is now at 80,000, right? But let's say that you then gain 20,000 or 20,000, 20% from there. You are not even back to 100,000 at that point in time. You're only at 96,000. So if you have a 20% loss and then a 20% gain, you're still not back to square one, right? So if you do it with more secured real estate lending, it's a little bit more of like a Thomas the Tank Engine, slow and steady wins the race approach to building wealth, rather than a very volatile, crazy, all over the place sort of scenario that you can experience with other forms of investing.
So if I'm a new investor and I'm interested in lending my money, do I just use my money out of my regular bank account?
So you absolutely can. That is one great way to get started. If you have an extra chunk of change, I know I've shared before that one of the things that we did when we moved to Utah was we bought our first house. And when we moved away, we sold our house. And then we had a very sizable chunk of change sitting in our bank account that whole time because we were waiting to invest in real estate, which took another 18 months. Had I known about real estate lending, that would have been the perfect opportunity, right? Because I didn't need it in 6 months. I had 18 months plus of time when I needed the money to be utilized. That'd be the perfect time to lend that money from my bank account. However, most people don't have that large chunk of change just sitting in their bank account. It's probably allocated for your emergency fund or other things. And I would not recommend investing that money in a real estate deal because you never know if it's something that you're going to need emergently. And that's not a good way to invest or do any sort of real estate lending. So instead, you can look at alternative options. So my favorite thing that you and I have both done is actually roll over our old employer's 401k plans into a self directed account. And what that allows us to do is, first off, it gives us so much more control because if you looked at those old employer 401ks, I had about 10 different investment opportunities I could choose from to invest in the stock market. So it was a couple of things that were like targeted age fund or something like that. I could invest in like gold. I can do like a total market account. I could invest in Asia. I could do large cap stocks and small cap stocks. And that was like it. I couldn't pick an individual company. I couldn't do any crypto. There's just very limited options, right? That in there. And so instead, when we rolled over our old employer's 401k accounts, you get so much more control. So you could do any of those things I just mentioned, but you also can do real estate and lending and investing as well. So we have both decided to do real estate lending with our old employer 401ks. And that actually gave us an access to a lot more money than we would have if I had just looked in my checking account, because that was about 6 years of contributing to my 401k religiously every single month. And then that money was just sitting there kind of in one of those investments that I mentioned before. And now it's able to be out in real estate lending deals. And I'm really excited about that.
So are there any other additional benefits of using a self-directed retirement account, whether 401k or IRA, instead of my regular money in my regular account?
Yeah, so one of the really cool benefits of using a self directed account is that you're not taxed on that money as you're building it. So it is tax protected. It's likely going to be tax deferred. It's not completely like tax free unless it's a Roth sort of situation. But in this instance, there is protections from having to pay taxes while you're growing that money. And that makes it really nice because that money can grow a lot faster rather than having to pay out the taxes every single time going forward.
So I just listened to this recording and I'm interested in investing, but I don't know where to start. What are my next steps?
Yeah. So, one of the best ways, if you want to do it completely on your own, is to do some reading. There are some private money lending books that you can check out, as well as groups that you can pay to join and learn more about the process. So, if you're one of those do it yourself type people, I would strongly recommend looking into Bigger Pockets, Raising Private Money with Amy Majori, Sub 2 community, potentially the Gator community, listening to podcasts about lending, kind of doing that whole process. And that just anticipate that that's something that's going to take you probably 6 months at a minimum to really understand all the things that we've talked about. I mean, you and I have been working on this. This has been a goal of ours for the past year. And we've finally done our first several deals and we're waiting to get paid back on those. So it's been a long time coming because there's so many different things that you can do in lending. And so you have to find your niche and then you have to kind of work through how to protect yourself and really understand all of those different things. So if you don't want to do that or don't have the time, maybe that is something you'd like to do eventually, but right now you're super busy with your job or your kids or just having fun in life and you don't really want to go through that whole process, send us a message and we'd be happy to walk you through the deals that we've done in the past and work through some sort of co-lending going forward so we can connect you with the borrowers that we have personally worked with ourselves so that you can feel comfortable and we will lend alongside of you.
What is the best way to get in touch with the both of us?
Yeah, so the best way to get in touch with both of us is through Instagram and sending a DM. We're also working on an intake form that will just talk about how much money you have to lend and set up a meeting with you one on one to learn a little bit more about your goals and what you're looking for. Do you have an old 401k? Do you have money in your just checking account that you're looking to lend? Is this money you're going to need in the short term? Are you just looking to build retirement? Kind of walk through all those things to just really understand. And then when we come across opportunities, then we've already talked to you about what your goals are and we can share things that might be an appropriate fit.
These were the majority of the most frequently asked questions.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Liz. And hopefully that helps most people really understand how lending works and some of the really more frequently asked questions that people have when they are thinking about lending so that you can do it safely. So we appreciate you for listening.